You walked in and the smell hit you first. Solder and dust and warm vacuum tubes and something electrical that had no name, but every boy who ever walked into that store knew exactly what it was. The man behind the counter looked up and nodded. The aisles were narrow, the shelves went to the ceiling, and somewhere in the back, behind the parts bins and the speaker wire and the boxes of capacitors stacked 3 deep, a stereo was playing. That was Lafayette Radio. And you never walked out the same kid who walked in. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Before you ever set foot in the store, the catalog found you. 400 pages thick as a phone book. Your father brought it home or it came in the mail, and you sat on the floor of your bedroom and opened it. And the whole world of electronics was in your lap. Shortwave receivers on page 12, walkie-talkies on page 41, turntables and amplifiers and reel-to-reel tape decks, and speakers you could build yourself from raw drivers and crossover kits. And in the back, the components, resistors by the bag, capacitors sorted by value, vacuum tubes lined up by number, transistors that cost less than a candy bar. You did not understand half of what was in that catalog, but you wanted all of it. You dog-eared the pages, you circled the things you could afford with a pencil, you calculated how many lawns you would have to mow to buy the shortwave receiver on page 14, and you kept that catalog on your nightstand for months until the new one came and you started all over again. Your father took you to the store on a Saturday morning. Maybe it was the one on 6th Avenue in Manhattan. Maybe it was the one in Syosset on Long Island where the headquarters was. Maybe it was the associate store in your town, the little franchise shop run by a man who knew your name and what you were building. You walked through the door and the catalog came to life. Everything you had circled on the page was right there on the shelf, in a box with a price tag you could touch. The parts bins were in the back, metal drawers with handwritten labels. You could spend an hour going through them. Your father stood next to you and pulled out resistors and held them up to the light and read the color bands and told you what each one did. Brown, black, red, 1,000 ohms. He knew that the way he knew his own phone number. He was not teaching you electronics. He was teaching you how to be curious, how to look at something you did not understand and reach for it instead of walking away. And the man who ran the store would come over and lean against the counter and join the conversation like the 3 of you had been friends for years, even though he had met you 10 minutes ago. That was Lafayette. Strangers who spoke the same language. The sound room. If you never stood in a Lafayette sound room, you missed something that does not exist anymore. They built a special room in the store with acoustic panels on the walls and a switching panel on the counter that let you compare any speaker to any other speaker at the push of a button. You walked in, and the salesman put on a record, and the music came through a pair of speakers, and it sounded good. Then he pushed a button and the same music came through a different pair and it sounded better. Then he pushed another button and the music came through the big ones, the floor-standing cabinets with the 12-inch woofers and the horn tweeters, and the sound hit you in the chest and you heard things in the music you had never heard before. A cymbal, a breath, a string being plucked 3 rooms away from the microphone. You were 14 years old and you were hearing stereo for the first time in your life, and your jaw was hanging open and the salesman was smiling because he had seen that face 1,000 times. That was the moment you understood that sound was not just noise. Sound was architecture, and Lafayette was the place that showed you the blueprints. You built your first stereo with parts from Lafayette, not a stereo you bought in a box. A stereo you built. You bought a receiver kit, raw speaker drivers, and a crossover schematic. You bought wire and solder and a soldering iron if you did not already have one. You sat at the kitchen table for a week and assembled the receiver, following the manual step by step, soldering each connection and checking each joint. When you plugged it in and turned it on and music came from the speakers you had built with your own hands, you felt something that no one who ever bought a stereo at Best Buy will ever feel. You felt like you understood how sound worked. Not because someone explained it, but because you had built it. Every resistor, every capacitor, every wire. Your hands had touched every single part of the thing that was now filling your bedroom with music. You were 15, and you had built something that worked. Your first real purchase was a shortwave receiver. You saved your paper route money for 4 months. You walked into the store with bills folded in your pocket, and you laid them on the counter. The man counted them, nodded, pulled a box off the shelf, and handed it to you. You carried it home on the bus like it was made of glass. You set it up in your bedroom. You connected the antenna wire and strung it out the window and draped it over the roof and down the other side of the house. That night, lying in bed with the lights off and the dial glowing amber in the dark, you turned the knob slowly. Static, then a voice, a man speaking English with an accent you had never heard. He was in London, or Sydney, or somewhere in the middle of the ocean on a ship. His voice was faint, and it faded in and out, and the static washed over it like waves. You lay there in your bed, in your room, in your house, in your town, and you were listening to a man on the other side of the planet talking to no one and everyone at the same time. You were 13 years old, and the world had just gotten very large and very small at the same moment. That receiver cost you 4 months of paper route money. It was the best investment you ever made. The walkie-talkies. You have to talk about the walkie-talkies. Every kid who ever opened a Lafayette catalog went straight to the walkie-talkie section the way a kid today goes straight to the phone. They were in the back pages, lined up by channel count and wattage: 100 milliwatts, 500 milliwatts, 2 watts, 3 watts, 5 watts. Each one came with 1 crystal included, and you could buy more crystals behind the counter to add channels. You saved your money and bought a pair of 100 milliwatt units, and you gave one to your best friend. The two of you spent the entire summer riding your bikes around the neighborhood, testing the range. Can you hear me now? Go to the end of the block. Can you hear me now? Go around the corner. Can you hear me now? That was the whole game. 2 boys on bicycles with antennas sticking out of their pockets, talking to each other from 3 blocks away like they were astronauts. You never actually said anything important on those walkie-talkies. You just wanted to know that someone was listening. Then came CB, the Citizens Band radio craze of the mid-70s, Breaker 19, every trucker, every family on the highway, every teenager with a mobile unit bolted under the dashboard of his first car. Lafayette was right in the middle of it. They sold their own branded CB radios, the Comstat 25 and the Telsat 805. Japanese-made units that were reliable and affordable, and CB users loved them, even though some jokingly called them by a nickname that was not entirely kind. Lafayette stocked thousands of CB radios, antennas, microphones, and SWR meters. For a few years in the mid-70s, CB gear was the fastest-selling product in the store. Then the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, changed the rules. They expanded the CB spectrum from 23 channels to 40. Overnight, every 23-channel radio on Lafayette's shelves became obsolete. They had firm commitments to accept delivery of thousands of units that nobody wanted anymore. They could not send them mock. They could not sell them at full price. They sold them for under $40 each and took a loss they never recovered from. The CB boom that had saved them became the CB bust that broke them. But before the bust, there was the store, and the store was everything. You have to understand what it was like to walk into a place where the man behind the counter knew more about electronics than your science teacher, and he was happy to talk to you about it for an hour. He was not selling you anything. He was showing you how a circuit worked. He was drawing a schematic on the back of a receipt. He was pulling a part off the shelf and putting it in your hand and saying, "Feel that. That is a 10-watt resistor. See how it is bigger than the quarter watt." These men were not employees. They were the last generation of Americans who understood how things worked and wanted to make sure you understood too. When the store closed, they did not get jobs at Circuit City. They went home and sat in their workshops and waited for someone to ask them a question that nobody was ever going to ask again. Lafayette was not Radio Shack. You need to know that. Radio Shack had 5,000 stores. Lafayette had 125. Radio Shack was in every strip mall in every town. Lafayette was in the cities, in the neighborhoods where the hobbyists lived, in the places where a man could walk in and say, "I need a 2N2222 transistor," and the kid behind the counter did not look at him like he was speaking another language. Lafayette was the store for the serious builder, the man who was not buying a walkie-talkie for his nephew, the man who was building a shortwave transmitter from a schematic he found in Popular Electronics, the man who knew what a capacitor was and what it did, and why the one Lafayette sold was better than the one Radio Shack sold. There were fewer of those men, but they were loyal in a way that no chain store has ever experienced since. They did not shop at Lafayette, they belonged to it. The associate stores were the heart of it in the small towns. Independent shops that carried Lafayette products under the Lafayette name. The owner was usually a retired engineer or a ham radio operator or just a man who loved electronics and wanted to share it. He knew every customer, he knew what you were building, he kept parts on a special shelf that he had ordered specifically because he knew you would need them. When you walked in, he did not ask what you were looking for. He asked what you were working on, and then he helped you figure out the next step. Those stores were not businesses, they were classrooms. They were workshops. They were the last places in America where a man could walk in with a question and walk out with an answer and a bag of parts and the feeling that someone in the world still gave a damn about the things he cared about. January 1980, Lafayette Radio Electronics filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. 125 company-owned stores and over 300 associates across 15 states. The CB crash had hollowed them out. Radio Shack was eating them alive with 5,000 stores and advertising budgets that Lafayette could not match. The managers who had built the company left. The sound rooms went quiet, and then came the phone call that every employee remembers. 48 hours. You have 48 hours to tear the entire store down, get everything boxed that has a valid stock number, and get it on a truck back to Syosset. Anything that is not on the official inventory sheets is to be discarded. 48 hours, 60 years of electronics, 60 years of catalogs and kits and parts bins and sound rooms, and the man behind the counter who drew schematics on the back of receipts. 48 hours to put it all in boxes and send it to a warehouse on Long Island, where nobody was going to open them. The employees packed in silence. Some of them took things home, a speaker, a tube, a reel-to-reel tape with the Lafayette name on the label. They could not save the store, but they saved a piece of it, and somewhere in a garage in New Jersey or a basement in Connecticut or an attic on Long Island, those pieces are still there. A shortwave receiver that still works, an amplifier that still hums when you turn it on, a soldering iron that still gets hot. They saved what they could carry, and they left behind everything else. Shortly after the stores closed, Lafayette held a warehouse sale at the Syosset headquarters. Everything had to go, not just the finished products, the parts, the assemblies, the test equipment, the warehouse fixtures. Thousands of people showed up. They waited in line for hours. One man called it the electronic Oklahoma land rush. People filled their cars with capacitors and resistors and transformers and speakers and reel-to-reel tapes and anything else that had the Lafayette name on it. They were not buying electronics. They were buying the last physical evidence that a place they loved had existed. They were buying proof. Circuit City bought the last 8 stores. They changed the signs to Lafayette Circuit City. They tried the no haggling approach. They used Don King in the ads. It did not work. The stores were too small for Circuit City's model. They did not carry appliances. The New York market had Crazy Eddie and The Wiz and Newmark and Lewis all shouting louder. Within 2 years, the Lafayette name was gone from every storefront in America. 60 years. A catalog that was thicker than the phone book. Sound rooms that changed the way a boy heard music. Men behind counters who knew more about electronics than anyone you will ever meet again. All of it gone. The man who used to work at the associate store in your town is still alive. He is 83 years old. He lives alone. His workshop is in the garage. The soldering iron is still on the bench. The parts bins are still labeled in his handwriting. He has not had anyone to talk shop with in 20 years. He reads forums on the internet sometimes, but it is not the same. It will never be the same, because the thing he misses is not the electronics. The thing he misses is the door opening and a boy walking in with a question and the look on that boy's face when the answer made sense. That was Lafayette. A door that opened and a man who answered and a boy who walked out knowing something he did not know when he walked in. That door is closed now. The man is still there, but nobody's walking in. If you ever walked into a Lafayette store, tell us which one. If you built something with parts you bought there, tell us what it was. And if you still have a piece of Lafayette in your garage or your basement or your attic, hold on to it. That is not old equipment. That is the last thing left of a place that believed you could build anything if someone showed you how.